on the kids.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's what happened up there for her senior trip. So.
Okay, it is 6:30. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order, and so we will start with Mr. Scarborough, Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now for the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. All right. Please remain standing. I guess you need to say anything, Ms. Rickfield? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we come before you today, humbly and graciously, Father. We thank you for all you do in our lives. Lord, just ask for your guidance this evening. You put a lot in us with what you put before us, with the district and the students before us, Father. Help us all to find ways to work together so that we may serve them and serve you in the process. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so we'll make an announcement that this meeting has been duly called and that the notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.043 of the Texas Government Code. Those present: Hank Dieter, Clint Shive, Donna Gilliam, Renee Rayfeld, Melissa Sartain, Lindsay Gosh, and Dan Reinhardt. So we are moving into public participation, and we do have one person, Mr. Steve. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm here to address an agenda item today, the Guardian Program. I'm on the School Security and Safety Committee. So we held a meeting last week. Towards the end of the meeting, I brought up the Guardian Program. We've been discussing it since we formed the committee last summer. I was informed by Robbie at the end of the committee that the board had already made a decision. We're not going to move forward with the Guardian Program, that I was told to table the discussion, not to bring it up anymore, and not to discuss it, which was in drastic contradiction to what I've been told since we had formed the committee. After the Uvalde massacre, I reached out to the board and Mr. Morales. I had concerns that we weren't in compliance with state law. We hadn't formed a Safety and Security Committee, which was state law. After I reached out to the school board, we stood up a committee. Robbie kind of took the helm of the committee, and we started that. Now we're in compliance with that. We held a town hall meeting for school safety. Overwhelming consensus in that town hall was, from all the parents that were there, was we wanted the Guardian Program. Overwhelming consensus. We did a survey of all the school staff within the district. Almost 67% of the school staff were in favor of the Guardian Program. Half of those 67% were willing to be guardians. I've never seen a school board that was so out of step with the community they serve as this one. I'm just going to put it out there. This is a conservative community. It is, whether you like it or not. It is, okay? This isn't Fluke, this isn't Austin, this isn't San Marcos, this is Navarro. This is what the community wanted. This is what even the staff wanted. We were promised at the town hall that the community would have a say. We were promised at the Safety and Security Committee that the community would have a say. We were promised that a survey would be sent out to all of the parents to have a say. Now we're being told to stop talking about it and shut up. I'm not going to shut up. I'm going to continue to talk about it until my last breath. You know why? I was in Iraq when the school was attacked. I was one of the ones responsible for recovering the bodies of dead children. I don't wish that on anybody, okay? I don't want this school district to go through what you've already went through. They have 17 class action lawsuits against them right now because they didn't take it seriously. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas just settled a $25 million lawsuit by the parents because they didn't take school safety seriously. I don't want this school district to go through that. I don't want 17 dead children on our hands because we didn't take school safety seriously. School shooters don't attack hard targets. They attack soft targets. They don't want a confrontation. They want a soft, easy target. They want to attack a school with signs out front that say, "This is a gun-free zone." They don't attack targets with signs out front that say, "Our teachers and staff are armed. We will shoot you if you come on campus armed." That is just common sense. FBI and Secret Service data bear that out. Now, I don't understand why we can't let the community have a say in this decision. I understand we have Guadalupe Sheriff's officers. I understand that. But one officer per 700, 800 kids is not sufficient. It's just not. They can't be everywhere at once. The average response time to an active shooter for an officer is plus 5 minutes per Secret Service data. The average active shooter is 3 to 5 minutes. Once an officer is on scene, it's too late. So please, let the community have a say. I beg you. This is too important of an issue for the community not to have a say.
Thank you.
Can I have 30 more seconds, please?
30 more seconds.
I canvassed with my wife during the proposition proposals for the bonds, for the athletic bonds and the new school bonds. I heard over and over from the community that the reason they weren't voting for the proposals is because they did not trust the school board. They feel that you guys are not transparent and you do things in secrecy. Superintendent hires, bond proposals, and this. The community is tired of it. I know you guys have heard it. It's not a secret. Let the community have a say, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, so we will be discussing the Guardian program a little bit later. But right now, we are going to go ahead and move into our construction update with AGCM. And click.
Pretty sure I can talk loud enough, or no, I need the microphone? Am I over?
Just for the recording.
Hi, Melissa New with AGCM. I have Cody Hope here.
Make sure
Still
it's
not
on.
on? Okay. Oh.
I don't know. It's not coming on. You want to try it again?
Not today, I think.
There you go. There you go.
Hi, I'm Melissa New with AGCM. I have Cody Holt here with Claycomb Architects. Founder President, Mrs. Epley, Superintendent, and members of the board, thank you for having us. So we've had some progress this last month. We can go to the next, or do I have the power to do that? I can do that from here?
You might have to turn it on with the button on the left side to switch.
Clay, can you assist her with that, please?
Ah.
Yeah.
You should have said the left side. Okay, so since last meeting, you issued notice to proceed on the public infrastructure to Bartlett. We've secured 5 subs. Fire alarm and electrical is the same sub. They're gathering documents per City of Seguin and TxDOT to set up a pre-construction meeting, so we can go ahead and start with that work. We have all the documents for that half-acre tract where our new entry is going to be. in place, and I believe y'all will be talking about that later. Planning and zoning accepted our final plat. Cody has some comments to return, and once that's accepted, it'll take 5 days to be recorded. So that's where the challenge will come in the next slide. Today, Cody resubmitted the site plan, and I'll let him speak to what those aspects were. And then Bartlett Cock on Wednesday will get all the rest of the documents together to the city of Seguin for that pre-con meeting for our public infrastructure. I'll let Cody give you guys status on permitting and things of that.
Yeah, so we got the planning and zoning commission, once they approved the plat as presented, with some of the few city comments. We were able to submit the site plan now for permitting. So that was submitted last week to the city, as well as we will be able to submit now the building plans as well. So we'll be able to go through the site plan permitting as well as the building permitting process now. So one of the things too, while the plat was being reviewed under Planning and Zoning Commission, we actually sent our landscape plan to the city as well to kind of jumpstart the review, kind of behind the scenes. So they are able to actually look at the landscaping as well as the parking requirements that we had on our drawings, and those came back approved or signed off on from the city. So once you see those now, it'll just be a formality at this point for that review during the site plan. And then also too, some of the drainage, we had a meeting with the city regarding some of the drainage and calculations that we were showing. The city had a couple of comments, so we're coordinating with them on those and getting those resolved as well.
So the challenge really is just how it's been this whole project is time. Like we said, the plat was approved by Planning and Zoning last week, but until Cody's response is actually recorded, they can't issue the site plan permit. They can look over the plans, and so everything, you know, it's just time. Really, that's just our biggest challenge. And that's where we're at. Is there any questions?
As far as the site plan, their comments, was there any major changes of any type to the site plan itself?
No, not for the architecture site plan, as far as the parking that we're showing and the trees and the shrubs, that sort of thing. Really no changes in that. There's just some drainage, but that had to do with kind of off to the west of the, where the high school's at. As far as some calculations where we have some runoff coming onto the neighborhood property, wanted us to tweak something on that end. So myself was just revising that.
Is this timeline typical, or is the city of Seguin so backlogged with other housing developments that it's slowing our construction down?
When we ask the question on time and turnaround time, backlog never comes back as the answer. The answer always comes back, you have to do this before you'll do this, this has to be approved before we'll review this. And so that's where the time comes in. So like for the plat, when we had the public infrastructure approved, we could apply and get approval for the plat, but then we had to wait for the next planning and zoning meeting for that. So that's where everything is just delayed. Like I said, they never come back with an answer on or backlog. We apologize. It's always this before this, and so now with the site plan, they tell us that they will concurrently review the building plan. But the building permit cannot be issued until the site plan permit gets issued. So it's
So this is typical.
it's typical, yeah. They have a unified development process, and when you read it, everything that they keep telling us is it's stated. Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
Oh.
Anything else? Thank you guys for the update. Hopefully they will get those approvals
Yes.
quickly to us. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is our discussion items, starting with the board meeting planning or the annual board agenda items for 23-24.
Right, so as I presented to you, board members, we have a draft of our annual board meeting agenda, and we shared that with you so that you could review that. Again, it's a skeleton of annual items that are typically needed for compliance, but also historically what the board has reviewed annually. Certainly, we will be adding specific items that come up due to decisions that we know need to be made, RFQs or RFPs that might need to be in place, bond issues going forward if that's something that we decide to pursue. It's a planning tool for you, but also a way for you to kind of get a lay of the land in a year at a glance and have the opportunity to suggest adding elements. As has been brought to my attention, wanting to see the results of the work, and you know, a lot of the things that people don't understand about boards is your actual role and what you're actually able to do, and one of those things, of course, is approving budget, and what those supplies and what that budget ultimately results in is student outcomes. And so you'll see there that I took the liberty of adding opportunities twice a year for our student advisory to come speak to the board, to give you some insights about how they feel like things are going and what supports they think they still need, as well as opportunities for committees to bring forth their recommendations. It's very important that our community understand that committees do not make decisions. Committees are put together, or task force are put together to hear the voices of all stakeholders to make a recommendation to the board so that the board can make a final decision. And so really allowing for that opportunity for representatives from the committees to come forward and give us that recommendation is also something to add, as well as speaking with academics that I personally would like the board to have presentations about what's happening in the classroom. Hear from teachers, hear from students about how we're adjusting, how we are in real time meeting student needs and shoring up gaps so that you're able to hear what they need and what courses of action we're taking to really improve student performance and know kids by name and by need. So just wanted to have this opportunity for any discussions of potential additions that you saw or questions that you might have.
I definitely like the idea of hearing more from the students and the teachers. We used to at one time had a what was called an in-depth report.
Yeah.
And we'd have that pretty much once a month, not always, but a lot of times. And they would pick a specific item that they wanted to give us more information about. And they would have students presenting, they'd have teachers presenting. That was fairly common.
So anybody have any other comments on the proposed? I mean, this is a fluid document, so it's going to change throughout the year depending on the issues that may arise that are going to need action or whatever. But I think it's a great starting point. It's the first time this district has ever had something as formally outlined so that we can sort of be prepared in terms of what the next month may look like before we actually get the agenda. So as you continue to review it, if there's any additional comments, if you would just get it to Ms. Epley so she can continue to update as needed, that would be great. So no more questions. We're going to move on to committees and board assignments as our next item.
So again, this is just an extension of the opportunity for you to openly plan. So we are adding a committee going into next year that we have not had in this district previously, the Compensation Task Force. The purpose behind a Compensation Task Force is to help educate all of the stakeholders as to how we are able to compensate employees. This is a very competitive time in education. I know that you've recently seen in the news some surrounding districts who have had to go to tactics such as signing bonuses to get a particular type of teacher. We are hearing by 2025 that we will not have any new applicants into collegiate programs to be math teachers. So, you know, we're becoming very aware that we have to approach hiring and retention of quality staff from a different angle. But we also have to educate all those people who are associated with our district about how we receive funding. People are very confused because the funding does vary so much from district to district. I know today Paul and I were speaking with some individuals about ESSER funding, and they were saying, well, you know, where's the rest of the ESSER funding? And we had to remind them we did not receive the amount of money that some other districts did. And I think that's something that makes it very difficult when people are trying to compare their options with districts as to why we may or may not be able to match a particular salary. And also understanding that compensation is global. So it's not just your salary, it is benefits, it is the perks of the job, it is the amount of time we're allowed to take off on our work schedule, things like that. It's also access to being able to go and see my children doing their activities while also being an employee here. Items like that that are culture and climate related as well. So I think this will be a good addition. We do rotate people through that committee. They have their opportunity to come to the board to offer their recommendation before you go into the budgeting cycle to talk about where they feel like we need to focus in compensation. Over the years of doing this type of compensation task force, I've seen that people become educated enough to start talking about balance. Last year, we focused on teacher salary. This year, we'd like to focus on our auxiliary staff. Things like that, where they're really able to make some educated recommendations to the board. And I'd like to see people in those roles of taking ownership and really understanding how it works. So that's an additional committee. Of course, the SHAC, DEIC, our Safety and Security Committee, you know, whether those are committees that we want to have a board member also participate in or be a part of, we certainly want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to discuss that, as well as we go into our visioning for our strategic planning. Do we want a couple of very specific, you know, spots in that to be board members observing the process, listening to the community, listening to our staff, talk through those recommendations. So just wanted again to have an opportunity for you guys to have that conversation.
So right now, we're looking at a compensation task force committee, the visioning committee, SHAC. I know that we've also had board members volunteer for the Education Foundation.
Yes.
In the past as well. And then I believe we have 3 already on the Safety and Security Committee, so unless somebody wants to rotate off, that one's full. So let's take compensation. Do we have a couple of people on the board that would be willing to serve on that? Clint? Anybody else?
I'll do it, need to.
We'll put Clint down, Dan and Hank down for right now, and then as we go through, you guys decide. The plate's too full, we can adjust. We've not typically had a board member on SHAC, but is there anybody that would like to serve on the committee, on the SHAC committee? I mean,
It's okay if we don't.
okay.
Just an option if someone's interested.
The healthcare professional.
Well,
I done a different time on SHAC.
I actually was the chairman of SHAC for 2 years, and it
Yeah.
had no problem. I am gonna have to give up the Navarro Education Foundation because I am on that committee, and it interferes with the Booster Club, and I am now the Booster Club president, and so I cannot do that one. So if someone will take that one, then I will go to the SHAC. It's only 4 meetings, and I already know the dates. And I don't have a problem because I ran it for 2 years, so I know all about it, but I can't do that plus the safety, plus that, plus the Booster Club, plus my life. with my children, so.
Sure.
Anybody want that? And Navarro Education Foundation meets on Monday, the second Monday usually, and that's when Booster Club is, and that's why I can't go.
I can do that.
You wanna do the foundation?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so then we'll put Donna down for Shaq, we'll do Education Foundation with Dan, and then the Visioning Committee, I would like to do the Visioning Committee for sure.
I would like to sit in that meeting.
Okay. Anybody else? So Melissa and I will serve on the Visioning Committee, and then, of course, Melissa, Donna, and I sit on the Safety and Security Committee.
And if anybody wants to rotate in on safety and security, I can rotate out on that. I mean, I want to serve on it, but I also know it's an important committee, so if anybody else wants to rotate in on that.
Okay, so, we'll say that those are set for right now, and then we'll move on to the budget update with compensation. So Paul?
Is it on? No. Okay. So I can honestly say, I think we'll have this much revenue. Don't know exactly which pocket it's gonna come out of, property taxes or state aid. But the revenue projections, we have on here are comfortable, based on what the legislation is. The tax rate, if you've seen some of the discussions and some of the publications, right now I had predicted 82 cents. They're saying we'll be down another 10-something cents. So our maintenance and operations rate will drop down to somewhere around 71 cents, a little above. And what I've also been read is that we are going to have to adopt it at that rate, even though there has to be a constitutional amendment passed in November. So we're still trying to we're working with everybody trying to work through what exactly we have to do as we get through this budget adoption. But based on what we have, that revenue number should hold. The only expenses that I've added since the last meeting was a 3% increase on the salaries, plus a $30 additional per month contribution towards health insurance. Up until 2 years ago, we never made any additional contribution. So we added $25 then. This year we would add 30. We are still below what a lot of people will pay, but it is gradually moving towards there. And plus the $30 additional this year basically covers the increase in the plan most people choose on the health insurance. So we feel that's a really good benefit for staff that are just looking for their insurance. The second page that you have there just shows where a little more detail about where the increases came from and the decreases. So I'm not going to go through them line by line. They are all there. Of course, the major increases is additional and payroll. That's where the big chunks are. The third page, I wanted to give you a preview of where we stand on fund balance, so you know that we are still in good shape, even though this would, as we move forward, that would show a deficit budget again for next year, but we are still in good shape in terms of what the board has approved in policy in the past is to try to maintain a 2.5-month fund balance. Right there is a 3-month fund balance approximately. So, and we still have that 4.8 million left over after that. And that's with 2.5 million that's been designated for various things, which we can probably designate for some other areas if needed in the future. A trial nutrition budget is based on what we've gone through the current year. And there's some, from where we're looking this year, if we're in good shape, while we may be in a small deficit next year, it's that she was working towards having a spend down this year anyway, as she had a little excess funds that she was planning on it. So next year we will probably be in the same boat if we end up with a surplus at the end of this year. The interest in sinking, ultimately that rate and the dollars we generate there will depend on whether or not we issue the $35 million in bonds before the end of this year. We're working with Samco now. We're going through the process with them to try to figure out if it's actually necessary. We've been told that the legislation that was passed by the for the property tax law included a provision that said that the hold harmless for debt would include any bonds that had been approved, not that had been issued where payments had been made, but just approved prior to September 1. So if that's true, then we don't have to issue those bonds now, which will again save us some interest on as we go forward. And what I may do in talking to Samco is see if that's the case, if we don't have to issue those bonds now, is there something we can go ahead and pay off some debt early, so to keep the rate, not drop it as much as it has to be, and try to pay off some debt early, which will help us in the long term. So we'll keep evaluating that. We're working with Samco on a daily basis almost, probably for the next week and a half. So I'll be talking to them daily. And the last is just a little more detail on the revenues and the projections. And again, all that will end up probably changing as we get more into the law and find out exactly how that tax revenue and everything is going to be split. So, any questions?
Questions about the budget? Only question I have is, did y'all run a budget with the compensation of, let's say, 4% or 5%? I don't recall seeing it.
We did not run a 4%, but if you did 4% across the board, you're talking about across the board for everyone. So, is that right? Yeah, you're talking about another $170-something thousand, and as an additional cost, approximately.
Because do we know yet what some of the surrounding districts are doing?
So, I had been informed by Marion that they were looking at a potential 5%. Again, they're already lower than us on a starting pay, so that's not catching them up, you know, if we also continue with a raise. So, you know, we did talk, Paul and I just kind of hypothetically ran a 4 and a 5, but just looking at globally what we were being asked in our unfunded mandates to do, we were being conservative, you know, for the budget overall. So it is something that if the board felt was necessary to go to a 4, you know, we would be able to put that into the budget. It's just continuing your deficit total. And we are fiscally conservative in our planning and certainly in our management to try to reduce that deficit. But you are currently with the 3% added deficit budget.
So if the constitutional amendment and all goes through, are we still speculating on what funding we would get that would be either, you know, with mandates or conditions versus not?
The constitutional amendments will have nothing to do with whatever additional funding may come. We have been told that there's $4 billion in the budget for some kind of additional funding for schools, but they have not passed the legislation for how that's supposed to be allocated, what kind of conditions will be put on it. And they're not telling us any of that until we get potentially September or October before they may make that decision. So, and there may be mandates at that point that says, that requires us to take part of that and give it as additional compensation. So we just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's my concern, is they're taking, you know, a lot of the local control, you know, that you would have for each district, you know, if they put conditions or mandates on that funding that comes out. You know, which, that's where they take the revenue on one side, you know, and give it to you in another, but with those conditions and mandates.
Well, and one of the conditions that they were talking about as when they were initially doing legislation was that 50% of whatever additional revenue, which it didn't matter what revenue, so it was if they gave you additional revenue for safety and security, any additional dollars they added, 50% had to go to salaries. So again, if we expect them to do something, we certainly hope they do something, but we have no idea what they will actually end up doing at this point.
Yeah, it's pure speculation, isn't it?
Yes.
Looking in a crystal ball.
My guess is they will do some kind of requirements, but we have no idea where.
Right.
Do we have any type of inkling whether what we do prior will count towards the money? Like, say we do it 3%, so it's $521,000. Do we know if that money is going to count, or hope that that money is going to count toward what they mandate us to do?
I've heard one interpretation where it does not. So whatever additional money they give, we have to give, we then have to give on top of whatever we've given now. So, but again, we don't know what they will, what we will actually end up, we don't know yet. And as we've seen with what they've gone through this year, there's no telling where they will end up.
Correct. And I will state, this is the second time that additional funds were proposed for teachers, where if you had more than 2,000 students, you were going to be mandated to give a $3,000 one-time payment. If you had less than, which would be us, or hovering thereabout, that 2,000 becomes, or 3,000 would become $6,000. And the debate really was, is that truly additional funding, or are you expected to come up with that money on your own from that mandate? Again, that was struck down a second time, but it is something that's lingering, and as long as we continue to have special sessions, it does make the planning of your budget very difficult, because we don't want to make promises to our staff that then become a fiscal burden that we end up cutting supplies or having to figure out ways to maneuver that, because we don't go back on once we say, you get this. That never goes well. So I think we have tried to be conservative. Certainly there are options going forward once things are final for us to consider, whether there is, you know, a reconvening of compensation later after the year has started. That is sometimes how districts approach legislative years, because it is so uncertain about what ultimately will be mandated or what you ultimately will have to utilize to compensate your staff.
The reason I brought it up, I guess that would be my concern. If we were to go too high in the beginning and then they tack more onto us, then we're going to be burdened. If we stay at a moderate level now, which we all agree that we need to give some type of raise, but if we go too high now, then we might hurt ourselves.
And remember also, not that it's a lot, but you did approve giving the retention payments for next year that we will be giving for anybody that stayed on and stayed with us.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Paul.
I'm the next one too, I think.
Just stay right up there, and our next item is renewal property and casualty insurance.
We're bringing the renewal to you tonight, and the reason I'm speaking to it is the standard wind hail deductible now is $250,000. That with that $250,000 deductible, we have a $210,000 premium. to buy that down to $100,000, so basically buy $150,000 worth of coverage, their offer is almost $27,000, it's $26,000 and some change. It's a very expensive option to try to buy that down, so my recommendation and our recommendation would be to just stick with the $250,000 deductible. We do have a healthy fund balance. That's one thing. The other thing is if it's some kind of a disaster, where it's a tornado, it's another freeze, there will be FEMA coverage that will help pay for some things along those lines for any kind of disaster. But I pray that I never have to see one of those. But again, especially with a freeze, but you know, there is some coverage there otherwise, usually in those really drastic situations. So.
Okay. Any questions on that? We have an action item a little bit later. If not, let's move on to the softball update.
All right, Paul, you can stay up there for that too, just in case we have questions regarding softball. We did do a request for qualifications, and we had, as far as I understand, 3 that came forward. 2, okay, I apologize. I think there was a little bit of confusion with that. Robbie thought he had a third, but it appears it's just 2. So we did look at that. We have one that is truly fully turnkey, which is what we were asking for. And so in looking at that, we would like to move forward with getting an estimate on the scope of work that we had discussed with the softball field, so we can bring that back to you with an actual estimated price and get your feedback on what that looks like going forward. There's obvious concern about the investment in existing facilities if the intent is to request from our taxpayers that we have the ability to build new facilities on the site with the high school. And so as I look at that, as I come to you and bring the options to you, I think that it really is going to be a conversation where we're weighing out those options. One of the things that I have been, kind of thinking through is if we were to and had the funds to renovate softball and baseball in their current locations, that would we then not ask for those? That essentially you are saying our spring sports complex is on this side of Link Road, and we would not be asking for additional new facilities. And then your bond would either be reduced by not creating those facilities or reduced from a renovation of existing facilities. So those are some things to consider as we get this estimate, bring that back to you. But something that I definitely wanted you guys to consider as we think about the long range planning of having, spring sports already established on this side. Is it just a stadium request that would be new at the new high school, or not? What is the direction? And of course, we will have our visioning committee, which is made up of facilities planning. So we have the opportunity for stakeholder feedback about that. But as we are in the timeline, if we want these improvements to be ready for softball season, I think we are pressed to have those conversations at a much bigger level when you consider the cost of those renovations.
Will they give a cost for like complete new build? Will we have that? I mean, if it were just a little bit more, just to build a new one there instead of.
Even if we were building it in the new location.
Right. Yeah, and not do bond,
Yeah.
Right.
Something like that.
I will say that as part of a request for qualifications, we did see pictures of completed projects, one of which was a full-scale stadium, full new build with dugouts. It did include turf, but it was slightly over $10 million.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
No, for softball, yeah, for softball.
Oh, that's just one?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Now, of course, that's a lot of bells and whistles, and so an estimate can start high and then you whittle down to what we need and what we feel like we can afford. But, again, it's that bigger picture of us really considering, what the planning will be going forward.
Any other questions, comments? So when will the estimate be brought back for us to have those conversations?
I'm gonna speak to that, well,
We are gonna contact them I'll let Robbie and contact them as soon as possible so that we can get them out to start looking. And we'll try to push them to get something to us for, the next meeting is August 14th. So that will be, I don't know that they'll be able to come up with something very good by then. But hopefully maybe by that, the second meeting in August when we have to approve the budget and everything, we might be able to come back with something. We'll just have to see how fast they can work and how fast they can come up with an estimate. They might be by the 14th come up with something very, very preliminary in terms of what they think needs to be done and how much it would cost. But we'll just have to see what kind of schedule they can give us.
and just for clarification, the RFQ came in when?
The RFQ came in Friday. So, yeah, we barely had a chance to really look at this, but with only two, it was kind of a very easy decision to see who would be able to do it the entire project.
Okay. So either August or September, we'll see something.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. So then, moving on to the next discussion item, which is the Guardian Program.
Board members, I think it's important that we address publicly the conversations regarding Guardian Program and that you have the opportunity to talk through the decision-making process as far as it stands today with Guardian. I will start by saying that when I came to the district, the very first day, I began noting what I felt we needed to do to increase our safety and security, not only for our children, but for those people who work in this district. It is the primary focus before we can ever have an environment where people feel they can learn. Research is very clear that your need for safety and security is the foundation for creating an environment where you can learn and be successful. So it is a primary goal and focus. In my first week here, I met with our partners in safety and security with the Sheriff's Department. I was incredibly impressed with the investment of our school board in having armed security personnel that are not without extensive training, working at each of our campuses. It is a tremendous investment, and you were ahead of your time before it became law. I think the conversations I have with these individuals in the morning as they check in to work on our campuses help me to understand the dedication and focus they have in protecting not only our children, but all those who enter our buildings. As Mr. Smead mentioned earlier in his comments, there is nothing more heinous and devastating than to see individuals cut down by someone who wants a violent end, and certainly our children. I take it very seriously, and I know this board does as well. I want to be very clear that in recommending to you that we continue the process of investment in officers at our campuses, that I am thinking about the best options we have for trained individuals who have committed to that ultimate sacrifice. There is no one in this room, there's no one that I've ever talked to that if you said, would you protect our children from a person who wanted to do harm to them, that they would not say that they wouldn't step up to do that. But what is difficult beyond that is the repercussions of that, and committing to the nightmares, committing to the collateral potential damage of hurting others in your attempt to protect. And those are things that law enforcement individuals understand and accept as they put on the uniform and the badge. We are constantly told in this climate that our teachers want to leave because they are being asked to do too much. I think it's important that we honor those teachers who also commented on the survey that they want to teach. They want to know that their job is to teach children, and they feel an incredible amount of pressure that they would need to have to carry or be worried about being in the line of fire with fellow educators who are worried about protecting kids with guns. It is not an easy thing, and there is no right answer. At the end of the day, we want to know we've done everything we can. In communicating with our law enforcement, they have highlighted that we are in a great position and that we are in one municipality. That some of the biggest issues they have seen are the lack of coordination. That when we're dealing with multiple municipalities, multiple individuals carrying, there is oftentimes a disconnect about who is the leader, who is making those ultimate decisions. I think we saw that firsthand with Uvalde. So knowing exactly who is in charge, knowing exactly what our plan is, and having that chain of communication and command is critical. I think it is important for our community to know that there is never a line of your voice does not matter in this. Your voice absolutely matters. I have never and will never tell people to shut up. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your input. And we want to collaborate and communicate together. The decision of a Guardian program has been shifted since the original committee convened. And that happened during the legislative session, where it went from, this is something that you can discuss, you can have surveys, you can talk about, and then recommend to your board that you want to do this, shifted to just, this is a board decision. Doesn't mean we can't still take recommendations. But at the end of the day, the history of the board to support law enforcement officers is something that, in speaking with our law enforcement officers, they also support. They have shared that it is not just one that would be watching 600 or 700 children, that in the instance of needing assistance, and it happens, we didn't have an active shooter incident, but if we have an incident of any kind, they are immediately communicating with each other so the other three can come over to that campus as needed. We know that the department is very close, and they have indicated that they would have multiple officers on site very quickly. Again, coordinating and knowing exactly who is in charge. So our continued communication with the Safety and Security Committee, our continued communication with law enforcement, I think is critical as we move forward. And I think it is important to note that the answer is not no, never to a Guardian plan. Right now, the answer is, at this time, we are not participating in the Guardian plan, but we will continue to review the process of the Guardian plan as it fits with our current safety and security plan. And if we feel that evidence, advice, input from community, input from staff is leading to the discussion coming forward to the board again, we will continue to have that discussion for you to make your decisions. This is something that could be started at any time, but it is something that we have to be thoughtful of and be able to plan together. So I wanted to make sure that this was on the agenda so that we could discuss that and make sure that we feel that we are communicating again, that at this time, that is not the choice of the board, but as with anything, we are constantly reviewing our processes. We are constantly looking at what we need to do to make sure that our children are safe, the people that work here feel safe, and that we are analyzing whatever we need to do to continuously improve our safety and security.
What other comments do we have? I think it's important to share why we support Ms. Epley's recommendation to put the Guardian program on hold for right now.
Do we have, and just because I don't have it written in front of me, I'm sure I can find it. Do we have a timeline of when we added the third and the fourth officer?
The fourth officer was added just this past year, at the beginning of the year, you approved the fourth officer, right?
Yeah.
And that recommendation came out of the Safety and Security Committee for that fourth officer.
On that survey, I did not see it, but it was just the Guardian program or not, when you asked the teachers, Robbie, or who, I don't know who wrote that survey. But, at that time, we were not asking on that survey if we were gonna get an officer versus the Guardian program. At that time, we only had 3 officers, and we were trying to see if the Guardian program would be feasible, and that's the survey they answered, but they didn't know at the time, or we didn't approve at the time, that we had an extra officer that we were getting. So that wasn't an option.
That was not, on there yet, but one of the questions was, would you rather have, excuse me, an armed staff member or an officer? And, 62% chose to have the armed staff member than an officer.
Okay, so that survey was before we hired people.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure my timeline was correct.
Well, and if I remember correctly, we discussed that, what he just said in the committee, when we started talking about the fourth officer, because when we put the survey out, the fourth officer wasn't necessarily the topic, it was the Guardian program, and then it came into play because of the answer to that question.
Correct. We had, it was just to recap, we had, so I was on that committee at that meeting, we had the Guardian program with the survey, the extra officer, or our own police department.
We're looking at launching our own.
And after we heard the initial numbers of that and the feasibility and the upkeep, that became no option for the office, for our own PD departments, and then we shifted back to Guardian versus extra police, and so that's why when we brought it to the board, we hired the extra officer at that time. But the survey did not approve it. It was like the 62% wanted an officer versus the Guardian program if they were given a choice.
The other way, they, 37 for an officer, 62 for armed staff.
And how many total people responded to the survey?
122 out of 309, so 40% of the staff.
And Robbie, do you know how many of that 40% of the staff is still employed with us?
I do not have those numbers.
So I have a question, because I know with the new release that came out on May 31st, that just went active, and we were forced to comply with that at the present moment. It required that every campus have an officer, or every campus have, some form of program. I don't recall that Guardian was one of those that was listed, because it was looking specifically for either hired security officers, or a police department, or an officer housed at each one of the campuses, including elementary campuses. Is that correct? Okay, because that was not one of the options that was even offered under this piece. And then my second question is on the way I understand the Guardian program as opposed to, say, a marshaling program, and I don't know what the intent of the Safety and Security Committee was in terms of having armed personnel. Because the Texas School Safety Syndrome differentiates them very differently. So in terms of the Guardian, it is simply, and I don't know if everybody always understands this part, the Guardian is simply, I'm going to protect my kids in my classroom by being armed. It does not necessarily protect children in other classrooms who don't have staff members that aren't armed. Now they do provide some of the training, but then the marshaling program is a little bit different. And I know back in 2018, because I was here for that, that was a big discussion amongst board members whether to do, because at that time we only had an MOU and I believe we had 2 officers in the district back at that point. And it was a long discussion about that, and I know even at that point, from community input and from the board, that that was not the direction that anybody felt that we needed to go. Now, obviously, a lot has happened since that time, and I also know that what was voted on in terms of adding the fourth officer, because I looked it up, it was actually done October the 17th. And it doesn't show me in board book, so I would like to know that information. It does not show me in board book what actually was brought, it just says the additional of the fourth officer, and it was under a recommendation provided by Mr. Morales, who was acting superintendent at the time. And so, without looking at that piece, it doesn't sound from looking at the board book and what is in there based on that meeting, that the guardian piece was even discussed amongst the board at that particular point. You know, I know we're discussing it now because of the things that have been brought up, and I think that's valid to do so. But at the same time, we are, as you said, meeting the state mandate. In fact, we're probably above what the state mandate is for that. And then as far as the survey results go, depending on, if only 40% of the staff actually responded to that, and knowing what our turnover rate has been, I would definitely want to reevaluate the staff. I know you can't make a survey like that mandatory, but then my other question is, did we survey at the time, because I heard staff, did we actually survey the parents of the children in the classrooms as to how they would feel about that?
We did not.
We did not.
No.
Because I would be interested in hearing, you know, because how the community feels about it, you know, in terms of their children coming to school and knowing that. Because if you are a guardian, it's not like we put a sign outside your door that says, you know, I am a guardian and I am carrying a pistol. That's actually hidden information. We're a small community, and because we're a small knit community, I have concerns on that aspect, not from the standpoint of not trusting the teachers to be able to do that, but if that information were to get out, you know, into the community, and how some people's reactions might be, oh, I don't want my child in there, or I want my child in that classroom, I don't want my child here. And I know here, historically, we've had that issue in the past of people wanting to request their teachers, so that creates a different issue for you. So I would like to know how, you know, the greater community feels about it, because as you said, we certainly don't want anyone to think that we aren't taking those steps. The other thing that I will say in terms of working very closely with safety and security, and I function within that realm pretty much all the time with what I do professionally, even the Texas School Safety Center, having armed people on campus and all that is a deterrent. But there are a lot of other aspects to that that make it equally, even if you look at, and I've gone through the whole the Lily Valley, and I've talked to a great many people in all of the other, and I've actually sat in on and spoken with the administrators that dealt with Santa Fe, and some folks that were involved even in the Sandy Hook piece. And the reason that a lot of schools are targeted is because, not because they don't have armed people, or not because they don't have access control, but they don't ask the questions, they don't make it difficult to get on campus. So a lot of it has to do with our training too, and I don't want to get so lost in the concept of safety and security from that standpoint that we lose sight of what are the other things. You know, are our doors locked? Are we asking people? Are we making sure that our students have badges? Are we making sure that our employees have badges? Do we have parents coming on campus that have not gone through a badging process? Do we know where our people are? Have we taught our kids to be polite but don't open the back door? You know, because that was one of the things we implemented too, and I don't know where that is anymore either in terms of having the ALICE program. There's a lot of different thoughts on that particular program as opposed to the CRAZE program and the other programs that are out there to educate your staff and students on what to do, and that's all about prevention and education. And then, you know, the standard response protocols and making sure the community understands what those pieces mean, because I know there's some confusion on that as well.
Other comments?
I think I just want to speak to, well, so for the board members who weren't at the meeting, when Robbie initially discussed that legislation had been passed and that the decision had been removed essentially from the Safety and Security Committee about the Guardian and Guard program, we discussed that at the very beginning in, I'm not going to say great length, but enough length that everybody understood why it was no longer going to be a topic of discussion for Safety and Security Committee, because it didn't matter anymore. The legislation took it away from us. Mr. Sneed wasn't there for that part of it, So when, he brought it up at the end, it's because he wasn't aware that we had already talked about it. And when Robbie gave his answer, he gave a much more condensed answer at the end, just saying, it's, you know, it's not our decision anymore, so we're not talking about it. He wasn't telling anybody, don't talk about it, you know, be quiet, like whatever. It was just, it had already been discussed, and unfortunately, Mr. Sneed wasn't there yet when we had the lengthy discussion. So Robbie wasn't being abrupt or curt about it. It was just, he was repeating something that we had already discussed at the time, and I don't even know that Robbie knows if Mr. Sneed was in there or not. Mr. Sneed was the last one to write, he wasn't there. So Robbie wasn't being rude or disrespectful when he was giving the answer to anybody. It was just, we had already gone over the entire corpus of why we were not going to be discussing that.
I would just say, so when we approved the 4th officer in October, it was from the recommendation from the Safety and Security Committee. At that point, that was the direction for the district to go, and the board agreed. Safety and security, as y'all know, has always been a priority. I think we have always been ahead of the game in terms of adding officers, doing more than what most people or most districts, especially in this area, have done or continue to do. We were talking about the Marshal and Guardian program years ago and trying to weigh out the differences between having the officers versus having our own police department versus Guardian, you know, way before just a year ago. And even with all that, we still, you know, talk to the Uvalde people. We've talked to people that went through the Sandy Hook tragedy, and we still are committed to doing, you know, what's best for the students. You talk to some districts and they have Guardian, Marshal, plus they have, you know, armed officers. So could we do more? With the limited resources that we have, we believe that our priority was to put an armed officer at each campus, and that was what was recommended to us at that time. The Guardian program came up, I believe, at another meeting where it never came to the board until a month ago. So that was the first that we had heard as a board that it had like come back around to a Guardian program. But like Ms. Epley said, at this point it sort of had been taken out of further conversation because we were being told by the state now what our mandate was, and that was to put an officer at every campus. So I think if in the future, if we're going to look at Guardian program, there's a lot of things, just like Lacey was saying, you know, 40% of the staff filling out a survey. We definitely want to see another survey done. I would want a community survey, just like Lacey said. We need to know how the parents feel about that. And then we also have to, from all of the conferences I believe that most of us have attended on safety and security, we have to keep in mind that you can have 62% of 40% of your staff say that they would like to carry. When it comes down to it, every single district we've talked to says the percentage is actually a lot lower that follow through with it when they're actually faced with all of the testing that they have to go through. But even before that, for the ones that actually step up and volunteer, the percentage typically is a lot lower. So I would just be cautious in terms of throwing out percentages like 62% and 62% of 40% is actually a lot lower than saying 62% of our staff said that they would like to carry. it's just not a true statement. And so we need to say 62% of the respondents, whenever we do surveys like that and come back out with the rationale of why we might bring it back up at some point in the future. We just need to make sure that the data that we're using to either agree to a program or to decide to table it for the moment, because as y'all know, I mean, we have fencing that has to go in, that's a state mandate. We have, other,
The alert system.
yeah, the alert system. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we're going to have to do as a district. And so as we tick those boxes off, then maybe at some point we can revisit not giving up an officer and adding it as a second layer. But I believe the board felt like, in the recommendation, it seemed from the Security and Safety Committee, was to add an officer over anything else at that point, and the board complied. So, any other comments?
I would like to see, the surrounding districts, I think Marion and Laverne both have the Guardian program, and that they do not have officers at each campus, but now that the state mandate came out, I'd be curious to know what they're gonna do. Are they gonna drop that program, or are they gonna keep it and add, because they have to add the officers? And so I would like to know what they're doing, because that is something that I would like. I was at a safety committee, meeting, or I was at a safety meeting in June in San Antonio, and that was obviously the hot topic, and there, you know, safety is number one.
Absolutely.
If anyone, you know, I wanna do what's best for our school, and so I would like if that you could get that information.
And since it's so recent, you know, we may have to give it a little bit before we can even know what they're gonna do, because what they're doing right now may not be what they're doing in a year from now.
They said that there's gonna have to be waivers because there is not gonna be enough officers to
Right.
go, that are qualified to go to the schools and fill all the slots by the start of school.
Right.
And so, we don't know what those waivers are gonna be, and they didn't know what they were gonna be, and we may not know until September, November, or whatever, so that will be interesting to know too. We're not giving up just because we're compliant with 4 officers, we're not giving up on our safety. Like we said, we are forging ahead with all the extra stuff too. I know Robbie is trying to price out a whole bunch of things to bring to us so we can get going on that.
And I think it's important to note too, that in the work we do with the sheriff's office, it's not just 4 people. This is a group of approximately 15 highly trained folks that rotate through and make relationships. And so again, very blessed, very thankful that you guys made the investment that you did, and that we do have that relationship, because we are not in the boat of some of the districts that are truly desperate, whether it's out of size of district, trying to figure out how to fill 32 campuses with armed officers, or truly just not having the resources in a small town to get that. We are truly very blessed, and we will continue to use them as a resource. There are, to your point, districts that are doing it all. They're doing Marshall, they're doing Guardian, they're doing officers, they're overlaying all of it. And again, that is something that I think, as you consider options, we would be looking at what are the pros and cons of that. I think the obvious con is who's in charge. When it happens, do we have a clear line of communication? To the point you made earlier, Ms. Gosh, does everyone understand the scope of their responsibility? Because when I ask you to do this, are you aware that it's not just your group of 22 kiddos? You're potentially going out and seeking the threat, and what those parameters are and what the expectations are when you do see law enforcement enter. These are a series of things that we would have to work through and coordinate, and feel confident that everyone is prepared, drilled, and ready. And that's a commitment that I think we know we would make if the answer is yes, we're adding additional personnel on staff carrying weapons.
And want to make one comment because of something that Donna said that I think is very relevant to the discussion, in that what was passed and what has been mandated as of May the 31st, we actually have until 2025 to implement all the things in there. Because, and it's not limited, it's not like we have to have the officers tomorrow, but you can later do the vestibules. So districts actually have, so I don't know that we'll see anything like a waiver for quite some time, because districts actually have until 2025 to comply with all of those things in there, including the officers. So we may not have that particular type of data. I'm not opposed to looking at a guardian piece necessarily. But what I am opposed to is choosing a guardian over one of the other programs and not getting all the data, because I do think if we're going to, now that it is us and not just the safety and security piece, I personally think that providing some education to everybody on the difference between the marshaling program, between the guardian program, you know, obviously everybody knows what an officer is, and a police department for a district our size is, trust me, it's out of our price range.
Right.
And under no star are we gonna be able to afford that. And it is a lot of upkeep. But in terms of the other options, you know, those are things we can do, but not without hearing how the community feels about that. Because the marshal on campus is similar to the guardian, but it is a different level of training, and it is a different response, you know. And so I would be interested in seeing all of that and maybe bringing this back later.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Yeah, just real quick, I want to add that I know our topic right now is the Guardian program. We're talking about the officers on campus, but I want the public to understand that we have implemented many safety features across our campuses since Uvalde. We just don't talk about them because it compromises our security. So I just want everybody to understand that this program or the officers are not our only lines of security, our only measures that we're taking to make sure that our campuses, staff, and students are safe.
Good point. Anything else?
I'll make one other comment about, to tack on to what Melissa just said, is that when it comes to the safety and security pieces, I know that many times people, and I heard it tonight too, and there are a great many things that I think in the past that people have felt like the board was not transparent with. As far as safety and security goes, I think these types of conversations are very healthy for the board to have and to have an open session. When we get down to the nitty-gritty of what our safety features are, those really have to be in closed session, and it's not a sense of trying to hide or anything else. I personally, if it has to deal with safety and security, and it has to do with my cameras, with my access control, with my guest system, with any of those pieces, even down to my network switching, I do not discuss those things in open session. It's just not going to happen. I can't let people know what email protection I'm actually using. I will not say it in an open session. I know that's on the cybersecurity side of things, but when it comes to your campus security as well, you know, outside of general things you just want your parents to know, hey, don't come knock on the cafeteria door, we're not gonna bring a kid to you. You know, things like that. I do think that, you know, and I wanna say that publicly simply because I want people to understand that there are some things that it's not that we're not trying to talk about it here, but it also puts things at risk if we do.
Yes, I think that's very important. In fact, I was going to make a comment, met with Robbie today about the updates to the emergency operations plan and talked about, you know, in presenting that to you, being very clear that there is only so much we are going to share in public session, and that is to be safe and secure. If all I need to do as an evildoer and a perpetrator is go listen to the recording of our open session and take notes about what I need to avoid, you know, that we aren't doing anybody any good. So I do think it is important, and I think it's a fair assessment that sometimes that might appear to be not transparent, but I do want to state that I don't think we can state it enough, that reminding the board to not say those things publicly, and reminding folks as we have these conversations that the conversations do continue in closed session. That's when we're able to get very specific about the board's expectations, about specific strategies, about specific tools that we're using that we wouldn't discuss in open session, and just giving folks that understanding that the conversation that you hear is not the end of this, but it is what we feel is at an appropriate level to continue that safety and security.
And I think the board has been, has shown the importance of safety and security to the district, even going back as far as looking at one of the goals that the board set many years ago that says something to the tune of, providing a safe environment for our students. So, if it wasn't important, we would have never set a specific goal for the district that outlined exactly that. So, any other comments or questions? If not, we're going to move on to our campus reports. Any questions on the campus reports? If not, we're going to go ahead and move on to the superintendent's report, starting with student registration and residency.
Wonderful. So as you know, we typically bring you some enrollment numbers, and to get to those enrollment numbers, we have to have registration. And so we did start that today for our returning students. We did a rollover of our student information system so that it would show that the student has now moved to the next grade level. And we started to field conversations with folks who had questions about returning student registration. While I'd like to tell you that everything ran perfectly, unfortunately not with everyone, but I did have plenty of calls of thanks, that was easy, it took 2 minutes, got everything finished, but also some folks with some questions, and so we're working through the troubleshooting with that. Residency verification will start for all on July 24th, and our online registration for new students will also start at that time. You may have also seen we did try to condense all information about residency and registration into one location. We had feedback from our community that if I have multiple students, it's very difficult. It seems like things are disjointed. I have certain information on this part of the web page, but not on other parts of the web page. I might have got information from this particular campus, but not from this campus. And then of course, just the transition from campus to campus, something as simple as a school supply list, which is very cut and dry at the elementary and even intermediate level, becomes much more complicated depending on the courses you're taking or the teacher's requirement as you move into junior high and high school. And so we wanted to condense that information into one location. So this year we created a SMORE newsletter, digital newsletter. We were able to send out the link not only on the website but also on our social media page. So we were able to give people a kind of a one-stop shop of where they can get that information, and then specifically, who do I contact if I still have a question that's not answered in this, and no, that is not social media. We do not monitor that page to be able to give feedback to folks in real time on that page. So we are doing a much better job, and will continue to do a job of communicating to our families of when the question is there. I know that it's convenient to post it on a web page, but this is truly the best way to get the answers you're looking for and giving them that avenue so that they are calling us and we're able to communicate accurate information quickly. So we have been sharing the process of that. Also wanted to showcase that we do have our back to school schedule ready to go for our employees. Today we had office staff return so that we can start preparing. It is an exciting time. It's one of those moments where you have a gut check about how quickly the summer has moved and getting us ready for our staff to return. It is a huge part of building our tradition, building that onboarding to get our staff committed to staying here in our district, that we're ready and prepared as they come on board. And so as we start the week, we'll have a campus work day with staff breakfast and introductions. We'll move into a campus PD day on the 8th, a district PD day on the 9th, Flipping back again to Campus PD available on the 10th and the 11th. And then on August 14th, we will have our convocation and staff breakfast here on campus. We hope to create an experience where folks will have a vendor fair to participate in, get their gear for the year, get tips and tools and resources, as well as have a great breakfast and come in and celebrate together. We have some student performances that are being prepared. It is always a touchstone for us at the beginning of the year to remember the why behind all of the choices we make and those intentional plannings that we are having. And then they'll return to campus time in the afternoon on that day, and then have a full campus work day before we return. I think it is invaluable for teachers and staff to have that time to really prepare and be ready for our kids, and to know that that is protected time for them to be ready, and continue this legacy of excellence for our kids as we look into this new school year. We're very excited about it, and in speaking with the principals, we're very excited about welcoming everyone back and getting the year kicked off.
Great. Any questions, comments on any of that?
I have a question. Is there any discussion or intention of being able to submit the documentation online? I'm hearing, I'm not gonna say complaints, it's just, the word is irritating. It's irritating to have to take off of work to bring in these documents when they could just scan them and email them in. And so I'm just wondering if that's a discussion that we're looking at moving forward technology-wise.
Not only has it been a discussion, it is a mandate. I have already told staff that we have a year to prepare, but we will go completely online next registration cycle with registration as well as residency. I think it is critical that we make it as convenient as possible for our families. We will also have stations of computers. So for those people who do not have access, they will be able to come up. We'll have staff who will be able to assist them in putting it in. This also prevents us from having errors, as we have paper copies of things that then staff have to transfer that information over. We're continuing the opportunity for things to be entered incorrectly. And again, in an emergency situation, I want to know that I have the correct phone numbers, that someone didn't transpose, that it is the family entering in the numbers that they know that we need to have. I know that that is something that folks that want that paper copy feel more secure about that, but I think we have to balance that out of what is convenient for our families. And if we need to print something, and if we need to use that to call that person in and say it doesn't appear to be all of the documents that we need, you know, we'll have to do that. I do also think, and I'll be talking with Celeste about creating kind of a guide. So here's what it looks like. This is what I need. Here's a picture of what I need to be able to verify your residency. If you're only sending me a portion of it, I'm gonna have to contact you back and say I didn't get what I needed to be able to verify. And lots of companies do it, lots of districts do it. So I am completely in favor of moving us in that direction. And so I made a commitment to the team that we will have the time to do it right. I didn't want to rush it for this year, but by next year we will be completely online.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You said registration on paper.
Yes.
We're taking registration on paper?
We are still taking things on paper. Yes, ma'am, which was a shock to me. I think my staff will tell you that when they were saying, and here's the form that they fill out, I said, are you serious? We're still using paper. So yes, ma'am, and that is why I said.
I know there was no document uploading, but.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? If not, then we're gonna go ahead and move into the consent agenda. Or district financials. Did anybody have any questions on the district financials? Okay, if not, then we're gonna go ahead and move into the consent agenda. Any questions on any of the items listed under consent? If not,
Do I hear a motion?
I have a question about the purchases over 25,000. Is that just, I mean, that looks like every purchase that we made over the last year. Is that what we're just verifying that?
This is any purchase in the past that we have consistently approved that's over 25,000. This is nothing new from a vendor that we haven't brought to you.
Right, you're asking for the renewals for anything over that reaches that 25,000, and that's that list?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I just didn't see a cover page, all I saw was the
just
Excel
lines.
spreadsheet, like, so
Yeah.
there's no, there wasn't anything to explain that, it's just an Excel spreadsheet, and I know there are all the budget numbers and the things, so just wanted to make sure that what we were voting on
Yes,
that,
ma'am.
because it doesn't, there's nothing that says what the
What it
recommendation is.
was.
Right, what the recommendation is, it's just the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I had the same question. I think the goal is just to be more transparent with all the vendors that we're spending 25,000 and more with, because, for the most part, we've approved those vendors through other avenues. Like, they've come before us at other times, so I question the same thing, like, I wasn't sure why we were seeing it, but it's just another layer of transparency. Any other questions? If not,
I'm looking at what the attachment is, and it's just, it's not what it's supposed to be. So,
Must have been a mistake in the attachment, because I was gonna say, I do believe that I read
Yeah.
the rationale, so I do
It's-
apologize.
It's
Yeah, when I looked at-
532 pages in
Yeah,
here
it's
of just
insane.
spreadsheet numbers.
yeah, that's
It's all
not
that's supposed to-
what should be there, no.
Okay,
that is-
well, and that's what I
There was a
figured, that's
list
why I
of-
said,
there was a
where's
list
my
of-
one pager?
There was a list of vendors that you
Okay.
should have seen, so I had a list of vendors attached, I don't know what happened, to there,
Can
so,
we have that amended to the minutes?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, we can redo that and bring it back and with the correct information. I did not, I just saw the listing and I thought it was there, I didn't look at the details when we were checking it, so I apologize for that, but no, it was an agenda item with and then with a list attached of the various vendors, so. Not the dollar amounts, but it was the
Yeah.
various list of vendors, so.
any other questions, comments? If not, do I hear a motion?
I make a motion that the board accept the consent agenda as provided, with the exception of the new report in place of the purchases over 25,000 dollars.
Second.
Okay, motion was made by Donna, second by Dan. Any further comments? If not, all those in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Moving to the action items, first action item is New Year proposed compensation plan. Any questions?
The only question I have, and I think Paul asked it or said it earlier, that we hadn't done a comparison to where we fall with everybody else in terms of our starting teacher pay versus, and actually, as far as the starting teacher pay, I actually would be curious to know what that looks like, for our folks that have been here longer, because our raises are typically on the midpoint, and so the lower you are on the scale, the more of a raise that is for you versus everybody else, and so it kind of creates a compression, and so when you bring somebody new in, I may be making, you know, I've been here 10 years, but the new person is now making what I've been making, and I've given you 10 years. I'm just curious if we had looked at any of that as to how the, and I know there's a concern with adopting a deficit budget and looking at all of the things that may come into play with the legislature and all that. But I'm curious to see that. I'm fine with what is here in terms of what's being proposed, but I want to make sure that we're offering enough of a raise for that in the event, you know, but I do think we need to look at this year in terms of what does that look like with the incentives, but then also are we providing enough that keeps up with the cost of living for all of our folks and not just, you know, because that's usually where the focus is. What's first year starting pay? And I think it's a little bit question than that, and it's been a while since it's been elected.
Yeah, and I think that we can definitely do a study for you. I'd like to see it more broadly done, where we are seeing, you know, what does it look like for first-year teacher? What is it looking like for tenure teacher? What is it looking like for veteran teacher in comparison? And I think what you'll find is, because the recommendation from TASB is about the midpoint, then you'll find we might be more in certain areas, you know, like our long-term teachers may be doing better or worse in comparison to another district. That's what I traditionally find is, you know, hey, we might not have the best starting pay, but you know, if you stick with us for 17 years, you make more than all the surrounding districts, right? So I'd like to do that study. I think that would be important. That's a part of that compensation task force, is us preparing that information and sharing it with everyone, including you. I think we also need to look at the sustainability of it over time, because the challenge in compensation really is about our revenue. And when you look at comparison districts, where are they getting their revenue? If they're able to generate more revenue because they have industry, because they have less of a homestead exemption, for example. In our case, we don't have that, but a surrounding district struggles to keep up because they have an additional 20% homestead exemption, which now they can't remove until 2028 because of the new law related to the $100,000 homestead exemption. So I think it's important that we kind of understand all the background. Yes, get the data of our comparison and where we fall with surrounding districts, but we also have to be very cognizant of their revenue stream and how they're able to sustain maybe larger increases. And I do think it speaks to compensation as a whole, and what is the environment we're providing here? What are the perks of being here if we can't match or exceed compensation from a salary point of view? What are we able to offer insurance-wise that someone else isn't? What are we able to offer in partnerships with vendors that give us additional perks because I show my badge and I get some discounts? And those are things that I do think we need to continue to develop here, and that's definitely a goal of Compensation Task Force. So if you will allow us to bring that back, I think the issue is truly the timeline of, you know, needing to start the year with a salary. And I know that you're aware that that's something we just have to make a decision on.
I wasn't really asking for this particular voting item, just in general, I think it's important to
yes,
we take a look at it, because
I think the last one is 3 years old.
Yeah.
And we did starting 5, 10, and I think we broke it into years of 5. And it was interesting because you're right, we may have been a little bit lower at the starting, but when we got to year 10, I think is when it started catching up, and you'd be surprised comparing to, you know, the other school districts. So that would be good to touch base, because that was right after COVID.
Yeah, I think that would be great to bring to you. I absolutely want to do that.
But I think also back to what I asked earlier, typically when we've seen a recommendation for an increase, it's usually been, the board has usually looked at a 3, 4, and 5 maybe, and had discussion about that. And then, to Lacey's point, we've also typically seen what are the other schools around us doing, because whether we like it or not, the Seguin Gazette will print, you know, this district gave this amount, you know, this district gave that amount, and we have always operated, I believe, fiscally conservative. And so we know that we probably will be looking at a budget that is in a deficit, but yet we have a very large fund balance that we've intentionally built up that allows us to make these decisions where we put the staff, or make the staff a priority when we're trying to make decisions, especially when it comes to retention and stuff. I get this is a whole different year, and we may need to be a little bit more conservative this year, not knowing what the state's going to throw at us later. But typically, we would look at a lot of comparative data before we just make and approve a 3%.
And we can absolutely bring that to you in the future. I do know that Seguin did publish their raise, sliding based on type of position. But I think also just that they are still searching desperately for teachers and are offering an $8,000 retention or signing bonus rather for math teachers. That seemed to be the real popular story. So certainly in the future we can provide more detail for that.
So I thought it was earlier when we were talking about it a little bit, and I don't know where the district is on this, and I know there's still questions as to how this is potentially funded as well, but the teacher incentive allotment, are we still in the process of doing that, or have we opted to not be a part of that?
So that was one of the first questions I had when I came to the district, is where are we with teacher incentive allotment? I know that a lot of us in the industry were not sure it would be sustained and kind of held off to see how is this gonna work, how are they gonna fund it. But now we're not in a position to be able to continue to wait as districts have adopted it. Now to know that some surrounding districts are in the process, I think our teachers will be put at quite the disadvantage if it is not available to them. And so I have asked HR to get us into the conversation to assign a cohort so that we're able to start making a plan.
Have we lost any potential hires because we are not part of TIA?
Nothing has been communicated about that, but I have also asked, do we have nationally board certified teachers? These are some of the questions that I'm not sure were even asked before, because again, they are entitled to those funds. And so that has been the conversation, is as soon as we finish this hiring cycle, we're all in to figure out what is the process. And for those of you who may or may not be aware, and for our public, the teacher incentive allotment was a program that was first piloted at Dallas ISD, where the commissioner was a school board member. And the idea was, how do we counteract that our best teachers have to leave the classroom to increase their salaries? So how do we keep them in the classroom, but making the competitive salaries that you would make as an administrator? And so they created a particular parameter that you had to be able to meet and maintain to get that. Once he became the commissioner, TEA adopted the program to then mean that that salary, once you qualified for that, followed you into your districts, and that money comes to the district to be able to maintain that salary. Again, we weren't sure, with school funding being what it was, that program would sustain, and we anticipated that they would say, it's optional, it's really kind of falling apart, no one's taking it, but people are starting to take it. And with that said, it's an amazing retention tool, because I want to stay in the district that has honored me with this, but it also then becomes a tool of tactic where if you don't have that available to me, I may not come your way. I may go to a place that offers it because I do have that option. And in some cases, depending on the qualifications, that teacher then could be in six figures. So we need to not put ourselves at a disadvantage. We need to look at it, study it, come up with what those parameters would be, and be prepared to offer that to those who want to come here. And again, it is something that you have to truly qualify for, whether it is national board standard certification of teaching, whether it is you passed a particular evaluation to show that you are truly earning this extra money. But yes, it was absolutely on my radar when I got here. It's one of the first questions I had about our teachers and what incentives are available for them.
Okay, any other questions? If not, do I hear a motion?
Make a motion that the Board of Trustees adopt 2023-2024 salary schedule, which represents a $1,650 increase for all continuing teachers at a 3% of the midpoint of each salary group, up to the scheduled maximum for continuing teachers, administrators, counselors, librarians, clerical, paraprofessional, technical, and auxiliary staff, with the exception of staff members that are already at the maximum or over, who will be frozen at their 2022-2023 salary. Also included are the schedules for stipends for additional duties as listed. Finally, as part of the compensation for staff, the district will increase the contribution for healthcare coverage through TRS Active Care by $30 per month.
I'll second it.
Okay, so motion is made by Clint, second by Melissa. Any further comments?
My only comment is because I want it clarified why I'm going to vote no. I'll just state that up front, because I feel like that this is the first discussion we really had about a salary increase, and I don't feel like and I know what the deficit looks like, and I know what all of that looks like, but I'd like to see the other data, and if I'm not voted, I'm not voted, but I just want to qualify, it's not that I am not for giving our teachers raises, I absolutely want to do that. I'm not comfortable with what we're offering at this point, based on this.
Yeah, I think I was in the same spot as you. I think what we're saying is that tonight we're approving a 3%. However, what I understood from earlier discussion is that once we know what the state mandate is, that we would revisit it depending on if it's adding an additional amount, maybe mid-year, or if we know that what we've given them already isn't part of what the state's mandating. I think we have to know a little bit more about the state mandate part before we can get more aggressive on the upfront, because I was exactly like, I think we should do more as well. But when you know that that's looming out there, that's how I got on board with what we're presenting tonight. And also knowing that we don't meet again until after the point where Ms. Epley needs to get in front of the staff and tell them at convocation that the board approved X amount. Does anybody have any other comments, or do you see it any differently?
No, I agree that we need to move some way now, even if we revisit it and move forward with more later. I think we need to move somewhere now, so we're not behind the ball. We're not telling the teachers, well, we'll just wait and see what happens. We really need to tell them that we're going to give them something, and hopefully more.
Right, so that's my perspective, is that I'm okay with approving 3%, but I want us to revisit it to see if we can make it more, either after we know what the state's doing or at mid-year, whatever, but I want it to be more than 3%.
And I don't think we'll know even what the state is doing when we adopt the budget, will we?
My
No.
understanding of it from reading various sources, is that they will probably not address this issue until September.
Yeah.
But I will say one other thing, that I know some districts are adopting salary increases. I know of at least 2 or 3 that basically have adopted conditional increases, based on what the state funding may be. Where they've said, we want to give you this, but we're going to wait until the state passes legislation. So they've actually postponing the raise until they actually know what the legislation does, and then they're going to say, then we'll figure out exactly what your raise is. So there are a few places that are trying to be very creative in what they're doing, but there are many that are just adopting an increase and then dealing with whatever the legislature comes up with.
And so essentially we're choosing to adopt an increase without really knowing, and we're not going to, even at the next board meeting, really adopt a budget.
So maybe we add to the motion that this is what we'll do at this point, but we want to readdress the raise in
once we know what the,
Based on whatever the legislation is, we will be readdressing it no matter, my feeling is, if they address it in the legislature, we will be addressing it with you.
Yeah, because didn't we do that my first year on the board? Didn't we do a raise in the middle of the year?
we used to, we would do bonuses mid-year.
Some mid-year bonuses.
We've done that several years, actually. Would that help? If it's like, this is what we approved tonight, but we want to readdress it, because I think, I'm not comfortable saying that this is all we're doing for the year.
I think ultimately, if you're going to say that you're not comfortable with that, and all of you are on board to go higher, I mean, ultimately, you know, we may have another mandate from the state, but if you're ultimately saying that anyway, the language could be changed in your motion to do it tonight. You know, essentially, Paul has shared with you what an additional percent would cost. And so knowing that, and knowing your fund balance, if you want to propose in your motion an additional, you know, increase, I think you could do that now, just knowing that you may have to dig a little deeper if we have a mandate. Again, it's been brought twice and has failed. So I don't know, I wish I could have that crystal ball to predict, you know, what would come forth. But I think ultimately what you guys are comfortable with is important, because if we're gonna be back here in 2-3 months to say, I wanna add, you know, yeah, I wanna add additional percentage to it, the complications of going back pay, calculating that, I'd rather you guys have this now and just alter the language if that's the case.
Essentially, you're going to be back paying all of your July employees anyway.
Right.
So, you know, there's some complications to that. We're also making a 3% what if, based on a lot of what ifs. Number one, we don't have the finalized budget. It's probably close. I mean, Paul has a system down, and follows Omar's system, and I know that it is what it is. And we know that an additional $170,000 is what it would increase on the fund balance piece. We have the healthy fund balance for it. And there's a lot of what ifs with the legislature, because my other what if would be, so the legislature is gonna come through and say this, and everybody that has already adopted a budget way back to July, because some districts adopted budgets in June, some are adopting budgets in August like we will. So we're basing a 3% on, well, what if? So we're kind of telling the teachers, hey, we think you're worth more, but we're not really willing to risk it, you know, because, well, all of these things might happen, you know. I mean, essentially, we are doing the same thing internally. We know what our budget looks like, and we're not, you know, so we're taking a what if on the 3% anyway, you know. It's not a hard and fast piece, and so, you know, I know what a lot of other districts are doing, and I don't think we need to do it 6% or 9% or, you know, or anything as drastic as what, you know, some of the other places have done. But I do think that in this market with these teachers and trying to retain people and, you know, even hire, and I know that in many cases what we would hire at this point are going to be people who either don't have a job elsewhere or we're hiring based on a promotion. Because most people are not letting anyone out of their contract if it's a lateral move. But at the same time, maintaining that momentum, because I do know this board worked very hard years ago when we did the last salary study in order to get minimum pay back up. And you lose that ground when those around you begin giving those 4% and 5% increases, and you're still doing a 3% at the midpoint. And granted, I understand the 4% would be a midpoint or a 5% or whatever it was, but I just feel like that, you know, in terms of all of the what ifs that are here, you know, if the state were to come through and provide that, you know, it's not that many more percentage points up above that. And so I think we can see that piece. So I think that's my concern in saying 3%.
So would you propose a different percent tonight?
I would propose at least a 4. Would be what I would propose, at least on that aspect. But again, you know, I know why we need to make some kind of decision for the staff, because you are dealing with back pay. I would rather do 24, knowing that would get us closer to, because I think you said Marion did a 5. Seguin obviously did a huge one, with the incentives attached to it, but the incentives don't actually count as raised. So I'd be curious to see what percentage Seguin did, but I would like to see us just be somewhere in that competitive range. And if the state comes through, obviously we'll come back and increase it. I'm not opposed to coming back in a couple of months and saying, hey, we need to do a Christmas, not a Christmas bonus, so to speak, but a one-time payment to make up that difference. I think we can always come back and do that. That's a lot easier than adjusting salary schedules back and doing the back pay on all of that. That's a nightmare on the finance side. It's a nightmare on the payroll side and all of that.
So last year we did a 5.
Last year, yes, we did 5.
So 4.
I think we've done at least 3% 7 years in a row.
We've done a raise every year that I've been on the board, and I think that is one of the things that makes us different than a lot of the districts around us. When they weren't giving raises, we were, that it was to be competitive. I mean, to try to inch up as much as we could. I do think we were one of the higher percentages last year that was given, when the Seguin Gazette article came out, so we looked good. That way, when people are comparing us, I'm not opposed to 4% at all. I'm actually not even opposed to 5.
I'm not either.
So
Just wanna
that's where I stand.
Stay in
on
tune
it.
with where everybody is, so.
Right.
Paul, can you speak to what that 5 looks like from sustainability standpoint, when we're looking at, you know, the situation with property tax relief, just what we know, and I know there's a lot of what ifs, but when I'm looking at fund balance over the next few years, that while still healthy, we do see a reduction in that fund balance. And then we've also discussed some of these other projects, whether that be the technology piece, and supporting a robust technology plan, as well as, you know, any improvements to some of our facilities, as we've talked about with softball. That fund balance, again, is not just a checkbook for us to continue. So if that's still something that you think with a 4 or a 5, we're in a comfortable place for sustainability. But if not, you know, speak now and forever hold your peace. Or,
Right.
Well, okay, it is really hard to say. So let me give you an example in my head. So we've got a $500,000 deficit with this. Then you go to close to, you go to 670 with a deficit at that point. So let's say the state does decide to give us the extra money. Then my head begins to go, okay, looking at original projections that I saw way back long time ago when the legislature first started, and they talked about HB2, which was what HB 100, I think is what it was. That was the one everybody thought was going to somehow get through. So models were built based on HB 100. Under those models, we got about an extra 1.2 million that said, okay. But then there were attached to that was, whatever we give you as extra revenue, you have to spend 50% of that on salaries. So now take me to, if they say on top of whatever you've already given, which that means you've just eaten up your 1.2 million. Because it took away the deficit, but then it took, then we had to add on to additional salaries. So you're looking at not only the 5%, but really another 5% on top of that, or close to it. So potentially. So then, so now we're this year, then we're break even, but now what happens to the future? Because we know we're not gonna get any extra money next year, so we know we will go probably in the hole next year, because we will give raises, you know, we will work to give raises, but, you know, we're adding staff, we've got things with facilities, depending on what all those facilities cost, what the additional costs are, we will go, potentially further in the hole. So yes, we can sustain it for a few years, but at some point you have to address it, and you're going to get caught in a bind, if it keeps going that way. Now, we've got growth, we've got additional, but like I said, I've even factoring in the growth as what we've got, and trying to be as conservative as I can. So if the growth is higher, then we're not as bad a shape. But then again, are we gonna have to add even more teachers than what we're projecting? So, being the conservative accountant that I am, I'm never gonna tell you to spend more money than we, I mean, I'm never happy with hearing the word's deficit, but the range we're in at that point with 3 to even 4%, you know, we've tended to survive every year okay, as we've gotten through. Going past that at this point, I mean, just because there's so many unknowns with the legislature, that's my biggest worry, is I don't know where they're heading. They've been all over the place at various times this year. They've gone from one thing to another, and you know, and not knowing exactly where they're going to end up really just makes me worried. That uncertainty is what makes me really uncomfortable with trying to say yes, we're fine, or you know, yeah, for a few years, yes, we're okay. Depending on what other projects you want to do and how we fund those projects. We've got other projects we know have to be done in the next year, that we're going to have to fund somehow. So that's going to eat into fund balance as we go. Or it's going to be additional borrowing that we can space out over time, but that's going to affect that maintenance and operations rate.
So, just looking at this, our fund balance in 21-22 was $11,590,000, but in 22-23, it actually increased by $400,000. So are we still putting money back into fund balance?
For 21-22, yes. 22-23, I do not anticipate us.
You don't anticipate the year end being the 11,957 that's on here?
No, that's the 21-22 fiscal year that you're looking at on that.
Says current, right?
Which one are you looking at?
The first line is 21.
The first line is 21-22, but then when you go 2 over, it says current projected revenues for 22-23 would be 11,957. I'm only looking at that because we're talking about the $400,000 or $500,000 deficit. And if we put
well, that's the prior year fund.
Yeah, because it isn't going down.
That's the prior year fund balance. The bottom line is the total at the very bottom, just above the green. So in 22-23, I'm projecting we will go down to 11,424. That's where I think we will end up, and that's largely because we had to put in the portables. I think without that, without the portables and without some of those extra expenses, we might have been able to break even.
Okay, that makes sense.
So yes, I anticipate us going down this year, and it's going to be close. But I really do think that this year we will be down for the first time in quite a while. But again, it's that when you drop $300,000 on portables, it's tough to not go into fund balance.
Right. But what you said earlier was right now we're showing about a 3-month operating.
We easily have we have a 3-month operating,
and we typically have
and we have an excess above that of almost $5 million. It's like $4.8 million, and above and beyond what we want to have set aside.
Right. Okay. All right. Thoughts?
tend to agree with Paul that I think it's a little risky to go all the way to 5%. And then, if they mandated that what we already gave doesn't count, then we have to do another 35%. I think we're taking a little bit of a risk, especially after the 2 years. Then we have the full hit of it. We don't have, the extra funding from the legislature. That could really affect us down the line. It may not affect us next year or the year after, but after that, it could really hurt us.
Right, to what degree, yeah, and that's what.
Yeah, well, we have no way to know that, yeah.
You still could have it now with the 3%, you know, and still take a hit, but it's to what degree if that was to occur. You know, so I would, you know, I still think that if we can have the motion amended to show the 4%, I think, you know, that we're at a point where we can still sustain, and be competitive. And if something does, you know, with the legislature, have us take a hit with it, we're at least not going, you know, overboard at this point. So it's just the level of, you know, risk.
The level of risk, that's exactly what I'm saying.
I'm actually comfortable with the 4% now, for the addition of $173,000, the rest of it will cost. I always like to give more, I know we've been doing that, but I feel comfortable to do that this time, instead of starting from the third.
All right, so I think at this point, we would just amend the motion.
Could we, I'll do that, I just want to make a comment. The compensation task force, how quickly are you thinking of getting that?
Oh, it'll start in August. We just need each of the campuses to offer their, nominees.
Okay.
And then our staff, each of the departments will have, folks that are on board. And so then we will do, we'll do a school finance 101 in our first meeting, so people understand the concept of school finance. And then we will start the comparison data from other school districts. We will start the TASB data of what's appropriate, not only just in basic compensation, insurance, but also stipends as well.
Right. I guess to tune in on what Lacey was saying, that way we're moving fairly quickly. If the legislator does come back and say right away, you know, in September 1, this is what we're gonna do, that way we can use that committee to help decide where we're gonna go versus just saying, okay, we're gonna do this. Now we're gonna do the committee and then we're gonna make another decision. That way we can just do it all at one time. That was my suggestion. Because then we'll get, as a group, we'll get more information that way. You know, the committee will, you know, get a bunch together, and then when we come back to make those changes, we'll have what we need.
And again, I think it does give some different perspectives on what they value, because sometimes you'll hear that, we'd rather see the increase in insurance, or we'd rather see it, you know, someplace else. So it is getting that feedback so you have a confident place of recommendation as you guys make decisions. But, you know, certainly we did run the numbers of 3, 4, and 5, and we're comfortable with any amendment you guys feel that you can support.
So do I hear an amended motion?
I'd like to amend the motion I made earlier to actually read for all continuing teachers at a 4% of the midpoint of each salary group.
Motion made by Clint.
Just teachers,
You said just teachers.
Okay, then let me reread the entire, motion we did. I'll gladly do it.
That will change, yes, that will change, but he just needs to amend it to 4% for whatever.
I think you can say the existing recommendation or the existing motion, you're gonna amend it to, instead of 3%, 4%.
I don't think you have to read the whole thing again.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I'm being real technical.
No,
but
I'd rather be right the first time.
Yeah,
I'd like to amend my prior motion, as read to read 4% instead of 3%.
Okay, so motion was made by Clint, second by Dan. Any further conversations? If not, all those in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Next item, renewal property and casualty insurance. This was discussed earlier. Any other questions or comments? If not, do I hear a motion?
I move that the Board of Trustees approve the renewal of the interlocal agreement with Texas Association of School Board TASB risk management for property and casualty insurance at a cost of $210,592 with a $250,000 weather perils deductible.
Second that.
Motion made by Hank, second by Donna. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Last action item, staff development minutes waiver. Any comments?
We just have a quick presentation from Ms. McMullen to explain why we're bringing this to now and our plan bringing it forward in the future.
The board's already approved it. I'm completing the waiver with the Texas Education Agency, and I just wanted to communicate with you the extra minutes that we have built into our calendar. We have 4 professional development days, and we are allowed to accumulate 420 minutes per professional development day if teachers are engaged in professional development. We only do 390 because we give our teachers an hour and a half for lunch, and so we're very honest with our time. But it equates to 1,560 additional minutes, so if we have a closure, we are well on the good side of instructional minutes that we will not have to make up the days or regain the days. So just wanted you to be aware of the fact that 75,600 minutes are required since 2015-2016. House Bill 2610 went to instructional minutes instead of instructional days. So our traditional calendar, we're already 300 minutes above that. We have 76,900 with an additional 1,560 minutes for professional development that counts as student instructional minutes. So I will be completing the waiver with the board's approval. We'll do this in February moving forward when we do our calendar adoption. We'll also take that part out and do that approval officially in the February timeframe. But just wanted to bring it to your attention that I would be applying for a waiver and that those instructional minutes are built into the calendar for any unforeseen cold weather. We might have extreme cold this year since we're having extreme heat. I don't know what will offset it, but I would like to see cold soon.
Yeah.
So, thank you. I just wanted to be transparent with what we're doing with the waiver minutes.
Any questions, Ms. McMillan? Comments?
I move the Board of Trustees approve the 23-24 professional development waiver days that equate to 1,560 instructional minutes.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Lacey, second by Clint. Any further comments? Not all those in favor? Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
So the board is going to go in a closed session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074 to discuss the duties of the superintendent. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074 to discuss the employment, resignations of professional personnel to include teachers and other professionals, and discuss and consider approval of resolution authorizing purchase of approximately 479 acres of land from the River Toskowitz Farm Foundation located in the city of Seguin, Garland County, Texas, off of North State Highway 123, near the intersection of North State Highway 123 and Timberland Road, and out of the Antonio M. Esmarzar survey, abstract 20, for a total purchase price of $63,000, and authorizing the superintendent to contract with and pay for a relocation company to move the house currently located on the property to adjacent property. Any related action will be taken in open session. So it is 8:44, and we'll end open session. Okay, it is, 10:16, we're back in open session. Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion, authorizing, the purchase, hold on.
You're just gonna authorize the superintendent
Right,
to
it
negotiate
just shouldn't
the
say
purchase
that.
of that land.
I make a motion that we, approve the resolution authorizing the superintendent to, continue with the purchase of approximately 0.479 acres of land for Bart Huckowitz Farm Foundation, located in the city of Seguin, Guadalupe County, Texas, off of North State Highway 123 to the intersection of North State Highway 123 and Timmerman Road. And out of the Antonio M. Ishnarazar survey, abstract 20, the total purchase price of $63,000. And authorizing the superintendent to contract with the pay for a relocation company to move the house currently located on the property to the adjacent property.
I'll second.
Motion made by Clint, seconded by Hank. Any further questions? Did I say that right?
Yes.
Y'all were laughing.
Oh, no.
I usually fix them up.
How long now?
I know, right?
Can you amend that one and do it again?
I usually mix them up every time they say a motion or
We did it on
whatever.
purpose.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Any other motions?
Yeah, I move that the board approve the superintendent's recommendation for professional employment as presented and discussed in closed session.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Hank, seconded by Lacy. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0. It is 10:19 and we are adjourned.